Hey chums, OD here, and today we're going to talk about the Dreaming Moons, Prospit and Derse. Each Sburb player has a dreaming self on one of two dreaming moons, either Prospit or Derse. In some extremely special cases, they could even have two, one on each moon. In both cases, the hero is worshipped and celebrated by the entire kingdom, despite the fact that Derse will oppose the heroes when the game is set in motion. The player is typically not aware that they have a dream self until their dream self wakes up, which they typically do by achieving some revelation about their own life or psyche. Some players might also be awake without realizing it, or always awake and able to exist as both their waking and dreaming selves simultaneously. Dream selves that are not awake are highly susceptible to influence by Skaya and the horror terrors, and both will sometimes use the players to set up critical parts of the game, years or even decades before the game has begun. Because of this, Prospit and Derse dreamers who have not woken up are known to do things like sleepwalk or write mysterious messages on the walls of their room. In the latter case, their ability to understand or even perceive their wall scrawling seems to relate to how awake their dream selves are. The dream self's most immediate utility for the players, however, is to act as an extra life. If a player dies, the dream self will slowly begin dying too, taking on the wounds of their waking counterpart. A co-player who is close enough can choose to kiss the corpse of the felled hero, at which point the dream self will be healed and take over as a new waking self. Since all of the players are considered royalty by the moons, who describe them as princes and princesses of their respective kingdoms, this mechanic evokes the archetypal prince, kissing a sleeping beauty to awaken them from a deep slumber. Even more important is how growing up in these two radically different environments helps shape the players themselves. You might already know that each player has internal affinities for either active or passive behavior, described to us by their hero class. However, a person rarely acts on what they want to do alone. All of our behaviors are shaped by the culture that surrounds us, and Prospit and Derse house very different cultures indeed. In this case, I think no one explains it better than the big man himself, Andrew Hussey. In his words, you could look to the passive-active nature of classes to make some sense of the Derse-Prospit dreamer duality. Passive and active are pretty vague things, and don't resolve easily into simple dualities like defensive and offensive. Those are the guidelines for understanding them, but there is clearly a lot of flexibility within that system. But if we're saying active-passive literally translates to offensive and defensive for the sake of this topic, then Derse would be very active and Prospit would be very passive. Derse's job is to attack, Prospit's is to defend. Being from Derse means you're from a culture of offense and aggression. Being from Prospit means the opposite. These might be qualities of the moons that rub off on the dreamers, or they might be designated as those dreamers in the first place because of those qualities. You could also take the view that these are innate tendencies to overcome. Or maybe sometimes they're tendencies that are resisted and need to be understood and embraced. So we can understand the dreaming moons as powerful cultural forces that push heroes towards behaving actively or passively, despite what their personalities might prefer. Sometimes, however, the player's personality or outside pressures from elsewhere could overpower the moon's influence, especially if the player hasn't woken up there. Finally, each moon's culture has a somewhat different relationship to Paradox Space's gods. So let's take the time to understand them. First, we have the three godheads. These are borderline unknowable gods whose reach and impact are so vast they are essentially infinite. The most influential of these are Skaya and the horror terrors. These two forces stand as two sides of the same coin, with every session of Sburb playing out as a sort of existential argument between them. Both Skaya and the horror terrors act primarily by influencing the players of the session. However, the similarities end there. The horror terrors deliberately whisper and instruct the players that listen to them, guiding them to take particular actions they find desirable. While their insight can be useful, it's noteworthy that the outer gods are based on Lovecraftian gods. They are infinitely vaster than mortals, and their desires and thoughts are just as unfathomable as their existence. They present a polytheistic view of godhood, with a pantheon of interrelated deities, and as a collective, they don't seem to care about the players very much. They seem to demand that players of Sburb prove themselves worthy of victory, or even mere existence. Many of their demands seem to require players to put aside their feelings to enact labor or self-sacrifice, and at times they even seem to try to trick players into outright dooming themselves. As such, they seem to represent the player's Thanatos instinct, or death drive. While they don't seem to desire the destruction of all realities, they're implied to benefit from the death of those that cannot meet their demands. On the other side of the coin, we have Skaya. As we've mentioned previously, Skaya's clearest analog is the Gnostic pleroma, and so it presents a monotheistic view of godhood. Unlike the horror terror, Skaya is immensely passive, only seeing and knowing the minds of its players at all points in time. Its clouds show players ideas in various important places and times, but it only seems to have direct control over sleepwalking players at a few points in time, and the defense portals with which it defends itself from the Reckoning. However, Skaya does have agents who seem to communicate its quote-unquote desires, which largely seem to center around the players. The sprites seem to encourage players to pursue the personal quests Skaya sets up on their lands, believing it will help them self-actualize as individuals. But they value the player's personal will above all else, repeatedly stating they wish for the player to follow their own heart and desire. In this sense, Skaya can be understood to represent the player's eros instinct, or life drive. The tension between these two forces structures the conflict each group of players must overcome to succeed in their game and create the third kind of god, the Genesis Frog. The Genesis Frog is literally a new multiverse, housing within itself infinite universes and Sburb sessions that give rise to yet more Genesis Frogs. As such, while it does nothing but exist, the Genesis Frog is distinguished as being a pantheistic god. A god that exists in every single facet of its world. The Genesis Frog will merge with Skaya upon achieving its final form. This evokes Carl Jung's 7 Sermons to the Dead, where he describes the Gnostic pleroma by the name of Braxis and as the Lord of Frogs and Toads. Prospitians and other worshippers of Skaya worship the Genesis Frog as the speaker of the vast croak, adoring the heroes of the session for the incredible god they believe they will create. Dersites loathe the Genesis Frog just as they loathe existence itself, attempting to outlaw frog-related iconography and mocking the frog through slurs and disparaging names like Speaker of the Vast Joke. Finally, we have the fourth kind of god, who are not unknowable godheads like the other three, but are rather cast from the mold of Greco-Roman demigods. This is where our heroes fall. Remember that the players are not just royalty, but divinity. Gods in training who must discover and understand their own divine potential during the course of the game if they are to succeed. As such, both moons raise the players' Dreamselves as royalty not just due to their status as main characters, but because of the Christian principle of the divine right of kings. Because of the power they'll gain, players of Sburb will have the potential to rule the universe they create if they're successful. So it makes sense the game would prepare them for that responsibility across their lifetimes. This might be why Sburb seems to condemn tyrannical and authoritarian impulses, and encourage players to embrace democracy and community-focused principles. But that's a subject to discuss in greater depth as we explore Homestuck's narrative. For now, that about wraps up the impact of the player's Dreamselves and Dreaming Moons. Thanks for watching! This video exists thanks to the support of my wise cohort of patrons. If you'd like to summon more videos like this onto your screen, then you can join them. Also make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. That's all for now. Until next time, keep rising.